So let me introduce today's speaker, Cindy. Cindy Mediavilla is a freelance library consultant who recently retired from the California State Library as well as the UCLA Department of Information Studies. She currently evaluates grant programs and teaches workshops on a variety of topics, including community assessment and outcome-based planning and evaluation. She has also written and co-authored several books for the American Library Association, including Libraries and Gardens Growing Together, Creating and Managing the Full Service Homework Center, and 5 Steps of Outcome-Based Planning and Evaluation. Cindy's MLS and PhD are both from UCLA. All right, and then I will hand it over to Cindy.
And Robert's controlling my PowerPoint because I am technologically inept. So.
All right, I'll find it here real quick. But I mean, the other thing I wanted to actually say before we got started though is that if you're gonna start writing grants, you need to know about outcomes. You know, whether you want to or not, it's irrelevant because I think I've written about maybe $10 million worth of grants, and you can have the best idea, but if you have no way to prove that this grant is going to be of worth to your community, well then don't bother doing it because the state, your funders want to see what kind of outcomes, what is actually going to happen with your grant. So. That's why you really need to know how to use it. And I'm going to try to, Cindy, can you make me the host? Because it looks like I can no longer show myself.
Well, me? I don't know how to do that. Christine.
Okay, so I made you the host, so you need to, can you see all the panelists on the right-hand side?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay, what am I doing?
So if you look at click on all the participants.
All the participants.
Mm-hmm. And on the right-hand side, you should see everyone listed.
Wait a minute. I see manage participants.
Yes. Yeah. And then you see a list of everyone. If you hover over Robert's
I see Robert, yes. Mm-hmm. It says he's co-host.
Yeah, if you hover over him, it should give you some permissions, and then if you click on that, you can make him the host.
Oh, make host. I see it. Yes.
There you go.
Phew. Is Robert now host?
Yes, he is.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's see if I can do this now. No, it's still not letting me. Hang on a second. I'll figure this out.
It says you're host.
Yeah, and it did say, I promise we did have it going.
So we were talking earlier about Saturday Night Live, and if you didn't watch it Saturday, you can still get it through the NBC app. But there was if you don't know this, I'm talking to the audience now. If you don't know this, Saturday Night Live was, for the first time ever, not live. It was done from all the different performers' homes, and one of the skits was learning how to use Zoom. And it was the most, to me, it was the most hysterical skit out of all of them. Because, people didn't know how to do it. So we're doing a Saturday Night Live skit for you right now.
Yeah. Yeah, we were going through everyone's apartment, and we were, my husband and I were saying, oh wow, they still in a small place. Or
Yeah.
I think they got a better apartment by now. They've been in a cast for how long?
Yeah, they should own a house by now. Come on. Put some paintings on the wall for crying out loud. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Well, I still don't know why I'm not able to share my screen. It just says it's
Uh-oh.
paused. So,
Well,
well, why don't you get started, Cindy? And at some point, I will get this thing going.
okay, thank you. But really, we're gonna need the PowerPoint because I created the whole. I'm not a big PowerPoint person, but this one is definitely reliant on the PowerPoint. So, so anyway, thank you all. I want to thank Robert for inviting me to speak today and about outcome measures, and also want to thank CLA. As some of you may know, outcome measures, I'm very passionate about the topic. So thank you all for attending. And yes, Robert is correct. If you are writing grants, or I understand that the State Library has made an opportunity available to possibly monitor grants or review them in some way, you absolutely must have comprehension of the importance of outcomes and how they influence what you're proposing in a grant. It's absolutely critical. Excuse me. Welcome to my home. You may hear my husband in the background or see our cats at some point over the next hour. Please be patient with any interruptions, as I hope you're being patient right now as we fool around with trying to get the PowerPoint up. Christine told you a little bit about my career. I do want to let you know that before I worked for the State Library and UCLA, I was a public librarian for 20 years, mostly as a library manager, but like you, I also worked on the front lines. So my heart goes out to all of you and your libraries during this pandemic. It's unlike anything we've ever had to cope with before, as you're well aware. Today, I am a freelance consultant who leads workshops and evaluates grant-funded programs, mainly for the State Library and CLA. I also do a lot of research and writing, including this book, or the book. If the screen was up, you would see a picture of the book. But the book, which is called called 5 Steps of Outcome-Based Planning and Evaluation for Public Libraries. The book is based on a series of workshops. My co-authors, Virginia Walter, Melissa Gross, and I did around the state for the State Library back in 2013. As the title indicates, the book takes readers through the 5 steps required to successfully use outcomes to design and evaluate library services. These steps are: first, assessing the community by gathering information. Second, determining targeted service outcomes. Third, designing and offering relevant programs and services to achieve the outcomes. Fourth, evaluating the effectiveness of those programs and services to see if they indeed achieve the desired outcomes. And then finally, leveraging the library's accomplishments to gain community support and can acquire continued funding. Today, I'm talking about just outcomes and how to measure their achievement. I will be stopping throughout the session to solicit input and ask if you have any questions, but please also feel free to ask questions using the chat box. And of course, for more information on outcomes, I do highly recommend reading the 5 Steps book. Even if I wasn't a co-author of it, it is actually a very good book and should be available at most of your libraries. Okay, so then let's get started. And Robert, should I just continue? I suppose so. Okay. Okay, so why are outcomes important? They're important because outcomes reflect the positive impact our services have on a particular target population. More than just numbers, outcomes indicate the positive change that occurs as a result of using the library. It's one thing to know that 3,000 children attended programs at your library last year. It's a whole other thing to know how those programs benefited the people who attended them. That whole other thing that indicates benefits, that's what's called an outcome. Although it often takes a while to fully appreciate the value of outcomes, they are important because they give us goals to accomplish. In other words, outcomes designate how we want to help our community improve. And since libraries serve their communities through programs and community-focused services, outcomes are, or they should be, the basis for designing library services and programs. Here's my PowerPoint. Yay. That's the screen that we need. Okay. Let's see here. Outcomes also give us something to measure when evaluating the effectiveness of our programs and services. How can we tell if we reached our goals if we never put those goals into writing? Excuse me for a minute. In addition, grants often ask applicants to describe the proposed outcome or outcomes of the project being proposed. So outcome statements are usually required by grant funders, including the California State Library. But most importantly, outcomes reflect the positive impact libraries have on the target population. When used correctly, outcome statements demonstrate the library's value and tell the story behind the library's statistics. In other words, outcomes are the human element behind the numbers. And speaking of numbers, let's quickly look at two other important concepts, inputs and outputs, which are often confused with outcomes but are not the same thing. Okay, so let's define inputs first. Inputs are the internal resources the library uses to provide its services. They are usually expressed numerically. For example, the number of library staff, the size of the collection, the amount of equipment available, such as laptops or makerspace machines, the number of conference rooms the library has, etc. Library staff are expert at tabulating these numbers and love to promote the resources they have at their disposal. And in fact, we often brag about the number of public access computers we have, or the number of conference rooms we have available, or how big our staff is, or certainly how big our collection is. Indeed, inputs are important. Because library outcomes can't occur without library resources. For instance, a literacy program can't happen without literacy staff and volunteers to provide that service. Okay, change the slide, please, Robert. Next slide. Good. It's also good to know the library's resources when writing a grant, because for one thing, the funder will want to know what the library is bringing to the table to carry out the proposed grant project. If there's a staff position or piece of equipment the library doesn't have, but is needed to carry out the grant project, then you'll need to write those resources, that is the inputs, into the grant and create a budget accordingly to pay for them through the grant. But always remember, inputs just reflect the library's internal operations. They do not reflect the results of the services provided. No matter how many staff members the library hires or how many books, computers, or chairs the library owns, they mean nothing unless they are put to use. Therefore, the quantity of resources does not in itself tell anything about the difference the library makes in the lives of its users. Any questions at this point about inputs? If you have a question, please just type it in the chat box. I'll wait a couple of minutes. Inputs are important, but they are not outcomes. I'm not seeing anyone typing, so I'm going to mush ahead to the next slide, which is outputs. Okay, outputs focus on how much a service or resource is used. In other words, outputs measure workload, which is important because they measure use and help us plan for and justify the need for library resources. So you can't really have outputs unless you have inputs, and outputs reflect the need for inputs. Like inputs, outputs are expressed numerically and capture things like how many items are checked out, the number of online searches, gate count, or the number of people visiting the library, program attendance, the number of class visits, etc. These statistics are important, of course, but what do they really tell us about our services? Outputs only tell us how much service we provide. Outcomes, on the other hand, tell us how people benefit from the service we provide. For instance, it's one thing to report that 30 learners participate in your library's literacy program. That's an important number to know, but it's an output. It's not an outcome. It's quite another thing to report that as a result of participating in the literacy program, one learner was able to get a driver's license for the first time in his life because he could actually take the written DMV exam, or that a mother can now read to her children. These results of the literacy program are the outcomes. They show the benefits derived from participating in the library's literacy program. Outputs and outcomes are both important, and in fact, the state library asks grant applicants to list expected project outputs as well as project outcomes. Funders do want to know, for instance, how many people you think will be participating in this project that you want money for. But outcomes are usually far more powerful, especially when you're trying to gain stakeholder support or are seeking funding. Outcomes do a better job of communicating the good things we do because the community understands benefits better than they understand the importance of the number of reference questions we answer, for instance, or the number of materials checked out, etc. We do still need to communicate the outputs of our work because it shows mostly the outside world what we're doing, our workload, but we also must tell people about the benefits and outcomes of what we do. Any questions about outputs? And again, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Outputs, gone. I see nobody typing, so I'm going to move on to outcomes. Okay, outcomes measure the positive impact our services have on a particular population, target population. More than just numbers, outcomes indicate the positive change that occurs as a result of using the library. Specifically, outcomes indicate a change in a person's attitude, behavior, knowledge, skill, status, and/or life condition. Outcome statements should be written only after assessing a particular community and hearing what that community's aspirations, concerns, and priorities are. The outcome statement should then target a particular community priority, which then becomes a goal for the library to achieve. Programs and or services would then be designed
Hey,
to,
honey, you
would
don't
be,
want to watch the show?
somebody's on, and someone needs to mute. So be careful. Okay, so let me go back. Outcome statement should target a particular community priority, which then becomes a goal for the library to achieve. Programs and or services would then be designed to achieve that goal. So let's look at some hypothetical outcome statements that might lead to the creation of library programs that would then lead to changes in attitude, behavior, knowledge, skills, status, and or life condition. So here are some sample outcomes that I pulled together. The first one is older adults know how to research family history, which would be a change in knowledge. Let's say the library conducts community conversations with several senior citizen groups and discovers they are interested in learning how to research family history. The library might then set for itself this particular outcome statements. Older adults know how to research family history. With this as a goal, staff would then design a program or programs to achieve the goal. And in this case, I'm guessing staff might pull together a set of, or a series of genealogy workshops, or maybe get a small grant to hire in an historian to teach people how to conduct oral histories. Okay. In the second example, we have learners are confident in their reading ability, which is a change in attitude. While interviewing adults who have difficulty reading, staff learn that these folks lack confidence in their reading ability. So the library puts this particular outcome statement together. Learners are confident in their reading ability. And then they design a literacy program that not only teaches people how to read, but also promotes confidence in reading ability. In the third situation, library staff read several reports about the library being surrounded by a food desert. That is, there are few healthy food options within the immediate area. Particularly hard hit are teenagers who begin to rely on junk food as a big part of their diet. The library then sets a goal that teens will eat healthy food, motivating staff to offer nutritional programs after school. In the fourth example, library staff reach out to community groups who serve immigrants and discover that these groups need help providing citizenship information. The library sets a goal to help immigrant residents become citizens, which would reflect a change in status, resulting in the creation of services to achieve this goal. So maybe they would create a citizenship corner like many LAPL branches have, with written materials to help immigrants pass citizenship, the citizenship exam. And then finally, after the library's YA librarian attends a PTA meeting where multiple parents express concern over their high school aged children's difficulty with math, the library decides to help older kids acquire math skills by setting up a math tutoring program 2 nights a week. And of course, the outcome there would be that high school students acquire math skills. What do you notice about these outcome statements? And this is now when you're going to be writing in the chat box what you notice about these outcome statements. And meanwhile, I'm going to read some of the comments you've already written here. So what do you notice about these statements?
Yeah, actually, I mean, well, if you're going to write something, I'm going to just kind of jump in right now
Please
too, and
do.
just try to emphasize something that Cindy is saying. And at least right now, you should start to understand the difference between an output and an outcome, because they're very different. And that's one thing that people tend to confuse when they start doing grants. And, for example, if we're looking at the first example, older adults know how to research family history. There's a change in knowledge there. That's the outcome. The
Yes.
output would probably be something like the number of classes you had, how many people came to those classes, maybe how many books that you bought to support the class. Those are all outputs. Those are just things that you can count. So don't confuse those things, and realize that those classes and the people that come, I mean, they're the ones that are going to have the outcome. So think about that change in knowledge, behavior, attitude. And if you can start to conceptualize that, or the importance of it, then you're starting to understand what the difference is, of what an outcome is and how it is different than an output.
Okay, actually, some of the things that you listed, Robert, are inputs. Not to put too fine a point on it, but buying books for a genealogy program, though, that would be inputs, because those are the resources that the library is providing to provide the service. And also the number of classes, that's an input, because that's the service being provided. Outputs are how the community interacts with the service and comes up with numbers. So the number of people who participate in, let's say, a genealogy workshop, that would be an output. I would have to think of other outputs specifically, but anyway, yes, it's numbers versus impact. And impact, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, numbers tend to be very easy to measure and count. Impact is a lot more difficult. So that's another way to distinguish between outcomes and outputs. So let me see here. I do want to look at Jana's question here. If writing a grant, I might not know what the outcome would be. I can guess based on similar programs. And so that's the tricky part here. The outcome, you need to figure out, and this is another thing that makes outcomes kind of mind-bendy, especially for people in our profession, because we tend to see things in a very linear way. You're not designing the program before you come up with the outcome. You get the input from the community as to what they need, what their priorities are. You then come up with an outcome statement, as the examples that I used, where, let's see, the YA librarian goes to a PTA meeting, hears from parents saying, our kids don't know how to do math. Then the library says, helping high school students acquire math skills. That is the ultimate goal that we want to help the community achieve. At that point, then you design your programs. You don't design the program first and then reach back and say, oh, what are the outcomes? Nope, that's not the way to do it. You do the outcome first. What is the goal you want to achieve? And then you create a strategy for achieving that goal. And in our case, that usually means coming up with some sort of program or service to achieve the goal or the outcome. So that's that's a much different way than how we usually do things. And we can talk about this further afterwards, but let me see. So we had the statements, and let's see, people are observing that they involve people. They're short and straightforward, written in the present tense. Yes, measurable, very good. They seem to be, they seem to need outputs. Yes, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. The numbers needed. So Stephanie observed that they seem to need outputs to back up how you are achieving outcomes, the number of older adults. So yes, those are actually indicators, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And let's see what Andy says here. The challenge in my experience is that outcomes are nearly always more difficult to measure. That's exactly correct. Okay, so let me, if we can go to the next slide, Robert, then we can see what some of the traits are of a good solid outcome statement. They are positive and aspirational. They're based on, as someone said, people, the target community's priorities. Outcome statements are easy to understand, or they should be easy to understand. You don't want a bunch of sentences in there. You just want a simple sentence that has a subject, a verb, and an object. Teens eat healthy food. That is very easy to understand. You don't need to describe the whole project in the outcome statement. They reflect at least one of the outcome change areas. So, you know, they either reflect a change in attitude, behavior, skills, knowledge, status, and/or life condition. They describe a result that's achievable, which a couple of people did say. And they focus on people, not on the library. And this is another very tricky part of getting library folks to get their heads around this. I've seen many supposed outcome statements that say the grant project or new service will result in more people coming to the library. We, of course, think this is a fabulous thing to happen, but increased library visits is not an outcome. It's an output. I guess you could argue that increased visits to the library is an outcome because it reflects a change in people's behavior. But I want to challenge you to aim beyond just having folks visit the library and instead have you think of the ultimate benefits they derive from visiting the library, whether it be learning how to conduct family history research or eating healthier food or becoming citizens. Those are the things that are the outcomes. Just having people come to the library, that's just an output. So what other questions do you have at this point about outcomes versus outputs or outcomes in general? In a few minutes, we're going to talk about how to measure outcomes. So any questions or comments about outputs versus outcomes? Oh, let's see, two now. Let's see here. Oh, someone said, David said that he likes putting the outcome first and then designing the services to meet those outcomes. Yes, that's the way you're supposed to do it. Okay, so yeah, how do we measure outcomes and evaluate success? That's what Jana wants to know, and that's a very good question. So let's go to the next slide, please, Robert. Unfortunately, as wonderful as outcomes are in helping the library focus on the community's priorities, evaluating success can be the trickiest, one of the trickiest parts of using outcomes. How the heck do you measure impact? When thinking about your ultimate service outcome, you should also think about how the outcome might be evaluated. Accomplishments of outcomes is measured through something called indicators. Indicators measure progress toward accomplishing an outcome via predetermined benchmarks. They answer the question, how will we know we've achieved what we set out to accomplish? In other words, indicators design what success looks like. Indicators must be realistic and measurable, and so usually include some sort of numeric target. Every outcome should have at least one indicator. Next slide, please. Because indicators are measurable, They should be expressed numerically and include a deadline by which the outcome will be accomplished. They should also be realistic. As much as we'd like to have a positive impact on everyone in our service area, this is not practical. So never give yourself a 100% success rate target. Maybe only 50% of the teens who participate in the library's after-school nutritional programs will actually begin to eat healthier food. So you'd want to target 50% of the kids. If you do better than that, fabulous. But you never say you're going to have success 100% of the time, because you're not going to, and then you fail. You want to achieve, you want to give yourself a reasonable target that you can actually achieve. If you do better than that, you can pat yourself on the back and say, we're fabulous. And finally, unless you hire an expert evaluator who's familiar with using complicated evaluation techniques, your indicators should be measurable through your usual evaluation techniques, such as surveys, focus groups, one-on-one interviews, observations, etc. If measuring achievement of the indicators seems too difficult or too exotic, then choose something else to measure. Next slide, please. So let's see, I know that this can be a kind of a complicated thing, so I'm going to use a simple, personal, maybe even silly example, but people tend to get this, because I've used this every time I talk about outcomes, and people understand this example. So bear with me here. When my husband and I retired, we took an internal inventory of ourselves and decided it was time to focus on becoming healthier. So I set for myself the outcome of Cindy is physically fit. And there I am doing a 5K at Disneyland. The statement is, I think, a good outcome statement because it's aspirational, it's easy to understand, it measures a change in life condition, so one of the outcome areas. It's achievable, and it has a specific target population, me. Once I had my goal, we then designed a strategy for becoming physically fit. We started walking every day, 3 miles a day. We started eating much healthier food. We just started paying more attention to what we were doing with our bodies. Okay, but we're not doctors. So how do we know that this strategy was actually successful? Again, in the chat box, what might be some indications of me becoming physically fit? Tell me what you think might be some indicators of Cindy becoming physically fit. Just write them up in the chat box. Okay, Oh, inches lost, good. Losing body fat, good. Stamina, productive, lower blood pressure. Okay, good. Okay, muscle build, excellent. Okay, so Robert, next slide, please. So yes, a lot of you came up with the things that we actually used. I lowered my blood pressure. I've improved cholesterol levels. I increased my stamina. Before we started walking 3 miles a day, I could barely walk a mile without panting and wanting to give up. But soon, 3 miles now is nothing. We actually, my husband and I do a lot of 5K walks whenever they come around. And actually that's one of the things we do miss is actually going on scheduled. We walk around the neighborhood now, but actually doing 5Ks with other people, that's something we do miss now that we're homebound. Improved mental outlook. The weight loss always comes up when I ask people if that for indication of being physically fit. And that's a good example of really paying attention to indicators and whether or not they actually do measure the outcome that you want to achieve. Weight loss is a tricky thing in that weight loss could actually occur from being not physically fit, from being anorexic or suddenly getting the flu and losing 20 pounds or 10 pounds because you've been sick for a month. So weight loss, in this case, I would say is not necessarily an indicator of becoming physically fit. And when you are coming up with indicators of your outcomes that you set for your libraries, make sure that they indeed do measure what they're supposed to be measuring. So just sort of a little heads up there. Okay, so let's see, where am I? I've lost my place. Okay, so let's now bring this back to libraries and look at possible indicators for our sample outcomes. Remember, indicators should be quantitative, should have a deadline. They should be realistic, measurable via your usual evaluation techniques, and should target a particular population. So let's quickly go through the sample ones that I came up with. And again, I just kind of figured out some possible indicators for each one. Remember, an outcome should have at least one indicator, and so I've written one for each outcome. For older adults, know how to research family history. After attending the library's genealogy workshop, participants can name 3 resources for researching family history. So there is a number in there. We're hoping that the participants can, so in the workshop, we may have introduced them to 10 sources, but at the end, we ask them through a survey to name the sources that they remember. And the average number that comes up is, some people remember a whole 10, some only remember 1, but the average is that they remember at least 3 resources for researching family history. So that's an indication of success towards meeting our outcome of older adults knowing how to research family history. I hope you see how that helps measure accomplishment of that particular outcome. On the second example, learners are confident in their reading ability. After 6 months in the literacy program, 55% of learners say they feel more confident in their reading ability. That's time sensitive. We're going to measure that after 6 months. A little more than half of the learners will say that they feel confident, and the way that we would measure that is by asking them, either through one-on-one interviews or a focus group or through a survey. And that's how we would determine that 55% of the learners say they are more confident. And we would consider that an indication of helping meet our outcome of learners being more confident in their reading ability. With teens eating healthy food, I'm envisioning perhaps a summer program where kids register, and as part of participating in this summer-long program, they keep a food log where they write down all the different things they eat every day, which, you know, they might think that's kind of fun to do. So after 3 months, you look at the food logs and you see that if you see 75% of the teens writing down more vegetables that they're eating, then that would be indication of success at meeting that particular outcome of teens eating healthy food. Immigrant residents become citizens. After a year, we hope that 80% of immigrants who participate in the library citizenship program become citizens. And you would then have to build in some sort of way to have them report back to you once they become citizens. And hopefully within the year, 80% of them have gone on to become citizens. And then finally, with high school students acquiring math skills, library homework helpers report that 45% of the students using the homework center have improved math skills by the end of the fall semester. You might not want to necessarily ask the students themselves, although maybe you do, whether they're better at math. But certainly the homework helpers will be able to report whether the kids are actually better at math or not as a result of using the homework center. So this has been pretty quick and dirty, but what questions do you have? Has this helped clarify what outcomes are, how you might measure outcomes, how they're different from outputs and inputs? Please, let's see what we got here. Definitely has, yay, that's good.
Actually, Cindy, let me jump in here real quick too. I'm just going to give maybe a few perspectives on, just as someone, again, who has done a lot of grants. And real early on, someone was asking about the different, like the function, the purpose of an outcome. Really the outcome, and I can't stress this enough, that's what's got to drive whatever project you're going to do. Yes. Because I've always found that the best grants are driven by this vision of something you want your library to accomplish. And it's not a program. The program is just that vehicle that's going to help you accomplish this outcome. Right. So don't start thinking, oh, I want to do a program where we're going to get all these teens together. We're going to do this, this, and this. And then from that, you're going to start guessing, well, what are the outcomes going to be? No, it's got to be the other way around. It's got to be, we want our teens to learn this. Okay, that's our vision. So what program is going to accomplish that? So do it that way, because if you start, just making these preordained outcomes, you got nothing. And the state library, the people that read the grants, they can see that. And they know that because they've seen thousands of grants before, and really, how you're able to express your outcomes and what those outcomes are, that's, I think, really important. And then the other thing, Cindy, can you just address, and I'm sure you can do it in a few sentences, is, again, measuring an outcome. Because, I've always found that at the beginning, you ask people, how confident are you in your leadership skills from 1 to 5, and then 6 months later, after you're in a program like this, how confident are you in your leadership skills? Right. And if maybe at the beginning you're a 1 and at the end you're a 5, well then, hey, your skill or your knowledge has increased. That's a good outcome. But Cindy, address how you measure outcomes, because you're measuring this particular program, for example. So what are you doing? Yeah, so I did a Survey Monkey at the beginning of this program with, I think maybe one person ended up not doing the survey, but the rest of you did. And I asked very specific questions related to your knowledge of leadership, your confidence, which would be attitude in your leadership ability, and what's going to happen. And so I have all that, I have all those data. I have the Survey Monkey. At the end of this project, I'm going to ask you almost exactly the same questions, and I'm going to compare what you said at the beginning and what you said at the end, and see how your knowledge of leadership, for instance, changed, and how your confidence in your own leadership ability changed as a result of being part of this program. And that's how we're going to measure whether this program is helped you become leaders, which is what the desired outcome is, what the original desired outcome was that this program was designed to achieve. Does that answer it, Robert? Yeah, I think that it's real, clear that in the beginning, when we set up this program, I think the biggest thing that I wanted to try to accomplish is a change in attitude or a change in confidence, so that as a result of being in this program, from when you were at the beginning to where you are when you're finished, you're more confident in your leadership skills, and that should indicate a change in, I would assume, yeah, attitude, confidence, and a little bit about just a change in your skill level. Because again, over the working with Cheryl, or for example, listening to Cindy today, maybe you're just adding more of these kind of leadership skills to your arsenal. And so again, from the beginning, have you learned more than, do you know more now than you did 6 months ago? And it's relatively simple. And we're going to predict that, Cindy said not 100% of the people are going to change. It's just not possible. And I know when I write outcomes, I'll tend to shoot things. I may say 75% or 70% of the people in this program will experience a change in skill or a change in confidence. And again, that's really something that you would want to think about when you're writing your outcomes. Is just, yeah, 100% is never realistic, but maybe 50, 60, 70%. That's up to you. You have to figure it out. I know that for a fact, again, when I've written outcomes too in real grants, the outcome at the end can be something completely different than what I thought it was going to be at the beginning. But that's okay. And the state library will tell you that too, that, because you don't necessarily, you shouldn't know what the outcome is necessarily going to be. So when, you start thinking about, well, what is the outcome? I personally don't think it's that bad if you're thinking, well, I'm not real sure. I mean, you're going to have an idea and you're going to want to talk to some other people about it. But, to predict what those outcomes are, I don't go in knowing that, because you don't. And, the people are going to tell you what it is that they learned, whether it's a skill, the knowledge, the attitude. And, just based on that, well, then, you're going to learn something for the next time. And whether your outcomes, specifically were achieved, again, that it's not an indicator of a successful project or maybe a not so successful project, because again, you don't necessarily know what people are going to learn. So, just keep that in mind. Actually, there was one other thing. If there are any people out there that are maybe working on a grant now, or maybe thinking about writing a grant, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us what it is. And, if you have any questions, maybe Cindy can help you with your outcome or come up with one outcome statement and just go from there. And then, ideally, if I were going to going with them talking to your coworkers now, you should know the difference between an outcome and an output. I think you should be able to express what an outcome is, writing one of these outcome statements. And then I think the third thing is to just have a general idea of how you measure outcomes. Because if you learn, I would say those three things today, well, then you're successful. And if it's clearer in your mind, right now than it was an hour ago, well, then again, bravo, Cindy, because you learn something a little bit more about, just what outcomes are, because they are really very important. And they're things you're gonna need to know if you want to start writing grants, or if you want to be successful at writing grants. Well, then you've got to understand what these outcomes are and how they work and the impact that they're going to have. And the fact that, that's what needs to drive whatever program you do. And it's not the other way around, because a grant is not a good idea. It's not a fun project. It's outcome based. And that's what that's the whole point, I personally think, of doing these projects in a library, is because you want to change someone's life. You want to change someone's attitude. You want to change someone's skill levels, someone's knowledge. And those all come from the outcomes, and not necessarily just, whatever program you do that's what's going to be driving, that's what's going to make your outcomes happen.
Yeah, as someone who worked for the state library, reading grants for 10 years and monitoring and even managing some of the grants, I can tell you that funders don't give libraries money just because they think libraries are wonderful. They give us money because they want to see how that money is going to help improve a community. And improving the community is the outcome. So certainly they will also want to see that the money went far, that 100 people participated rather than just 5. But the most important thing to them is that the money that they are giving you is providing a positive impact in the community. And Robert's right with the state library, and I'm sure this is true with any funder. If you're just cobbling together an outcome because, oops, we designed the program first and then we made up an outcome, the funder can sniff that out a mile away. So don't think you're pulling one over on the funder, because we have read thousands of grant applications, and you are competing with other applicants. So you have to have a true, sincere desire to improve the community in some way. And that is the outcome that you are designing the program to reach. So, and seriously, funders can sniff it out if that's not your motivation.
And there's one thing I'll put in a plug for the people at the state library is that one thing I've always found is they understand the outcomes. They know outcomes. And so if you have questions when you're putting your grant together and you're not exactly sure how to express what an outcome might be, ask your grant person that you're working with. Actually, ask Cindy, start with her. She is literally the queen of outcomes. And, you know, she literally wrote the book about public library outcomes. So, you know, I'm sure she would be more than happy to help you out if you have a question about this outcome statement. I'm struggling with it. And, you know, I would ask her. You can ask me because I think I understand this fairly well. And I said a comment from Natasha just about the unintended consequences or unforeseen things that happen, an outcome. You know, that's great. If you're finding out something about your community that you did not anticipate because of, you know, the grant or the program that you were doing, you know, if it's something that's different, well then, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You maybe didn't foresee it when you started, but once you do know this, now you've got knowledge. And if you want to do something else that specifically that could address this new outcome that popped up, you know, go for it. All the better.
I think that what we're going through right now with the pandemic and having to drastically change service models, there are going to be lots of unforeseen outcomes that come out of this and a lot of learning. And it's going to be very interesting to see how things are going to be different from now on. I think in hopefully a much more positive way. But, you know, people who have grants, who were given grants right now, even this particular program, who the hell could have guessed that this was going to happen? And so funders are going to have to, you know, the outcomes are lots of unforeseen outcomes, and I hope in a positive way, are going to be happening as a result of what has been thrust on us. So sometimes things just happen. As long as learning occurs because of that, that's a good thing from the, I think, from the funder's perspective.
Okay, if there are any other, you know, questions or comments, you've got Cindy's email, or, you know.
Yes, and please, I know Robert offered but I truly love outcomes. I love the whole concept of it. I love helping people structure them and write them. So don't feel shy about contacting me.
And then just a couple other real quick reminders that on Thursday at noon, we're going to be doing another conversation, this time with Hillary Thayer, the CLA president. She's also the director. Actually, she's Melissa's boss up in Monterey County, but she's going to talk about her leadership journey. And one thing that I'm going to ask her about is, like, what was the decision process for, canceling the 2020 CLA conference, among other things. So I think it should be a good, interesting conversation, and hopefully you can join us for that. Christine did mention that this particular webinar has been recorded. We purposely for this one did not open it up to the whole world because we just wanted it to do it basically for the cohorts, because we weren't sure how many people might have signed up, and to try to keep it a little bit smaller. And then again, Christine has just added the link to the survey so you can evaluate this program. Yeah, ideally, do you know more about outcomes than you did an hour ago? And I think with that, do you have anything else, Cindy, that you would like to add?
No, just again, thank you for including me, and I'm glad we were able to get the PowerPoint up.
Yeah, and hey, thank you so much, Cindy. I mean, every time you do this, I learn a little bit more about outcomes.
Good.
And, again, everyone out there in cohort world, thank you all so much. Just keep doing what you're doing. Stay safe. And, I hope to see you all soon in person, as well as at these upcoming webinars. So everyone take care, okay? Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Hey, Robert,
Okay.
it doesn't give me the opportunity to stop recording.
Okay, maybe I can do that.